In 1956, somewhere in the Burgundian countryside, a farming couple sat down and they made a decision. A cheese that had been eaten at the court of Louis XIV, the Brillant-Savarin had called the king of cheeses, and that more than 300 farms had once made with pride, was almost gone. 2 world wars had seen to that, but Robert and Simone Berthoud weren't ready to let it disappear. They tracked down the last people who still knew how to make it, gathered that knowledge together, and brought it back from the edge. That cheese is Epoise, and without those two people, you would never have tasted it. So, Burgundy, or as the French call it, Bourgogne. It sits in the heart of eastern France, roughly halfway between Paris and the Alps. And if you've ever driven south through France, there's a good chance that you passed right through it, probably without even realizing quite how special the ground beneath your wheels was. It's a region that carries a lot of history. For a stretch of the Middle Ages, the Duchy of Burgundy was so powerful it was essentially a rival to the French crown itself, controlling territory that stretched well beyond what we know as Burgundy today. The Dukes of Burgundy were some of the wealthiest and most influential rulers in all of Europe. And that legacy is still very much visible. The architecture, the abbeys, the towns. There's a grandeur to this part of France that goes beyond the vineyards. And then, of course, there's the canal de Bourgogne, winds its way through the region for nearly 250 kilometers. Now, let's talk about what's on the plate, because Burgundy's food is just as serious as the region's reputation suggests. This is a region that genuinely has it all. You've got some of the most celebrated beef in France, from the white Charolais cattle, those beautiful stocky animals you'll spot grazing across the hills. And then there's the coq au vin, which didn't just come from Burgundy, it basically is Burgundy in a pot. Oeufs en Meurette, poached eggs in a rich red wine sauce, and snails. Proper Burgundy snails, baked in garlic and herb butter. But what I find really interesting is that Burgundy isn't just one cuisine, it's several, depending on where you are. Head into the Morvan, the wild forest heart of the region, and the food gets earthier and more rustic. We're talking buckwheat pancakes with bacon, ham and cream sauce, potato cakes eaten with fresh cheese. It's the food of people who worked hard in cold weather and needed feeding properly. And then down towards Bresse, you're into some of the most prized poultry in the world. It's a region where every valley seems to have its own speciality, its own quiet pride about what it puts on the table, which honestly is one of the things that I love most about France. Let's start with a dish that, if I'm honest, is probably the reason many of you found this episode in the first place. Bœuf Bourguignon. Beef slow braised in red wine with pearl onions, carrots, mushrooms, and lardons until it becomes something that is generally more than the sum of its parts. It's rich, it's deeply savory, and it smells like exactly the kind of kitchen you want to be standing in on a cold afternoon. If French cuisine had a greatest hits album, this would be on it. Now, I've actually done a full episode on Bœuf Bourguignon already with the wonderful Olivier Carfus. So if you want to go deep into the recipe and how-to of all things Bœuf Bourguignon, go back and give that one a listen. But what I do want to talk about here is where it actually came from, because the story is more complicated and more interesting than most people realize. It started as a peasant dish, tough, cheaper cuts of beef that needed long, slow cooking in liquid to become tender. And wine, of course, being what it is in Burgundy, was the obvious choice. The version that we know today, codified and refined, only really came together in the early 20th century when Auguste Escoffier put his stamp on it in 1903. Before that, it was far more rustic, and here's the thing. For a long time, it wasn't even considered a Burgundian dish at all. It was actually more associated with Paris, where wine merchants were serving it regularly. Burgundy essentially claimed it as its own in the interwar period as part of its deliberate push to promote regional food and tourism. And here's my favourite fun fact about Bœuf Bourguignon. In Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Captain Christopher Pike of the USS Enterprise, he makes Bœuf Bourguignon, Julia Child style no less. So apparently, in the future, when humanity has mastered warp speed and space exploration, we are still cooking Bœuf Bourguignon. And honestly, I just can't understand why we wouldn't. Next up, coq au vin, another dish that needs very little introduction. Rooster pieces braised in red wine with bacon, mushrooms, onions, and carrots until everything becomes deeply flavoured and impossibly tender. It's the kind of dish that makes the whole house smell extraordinary and reminds you why French cooking at its heart is really just about patience and good ingredients. Like Bœuf Bourguignon, I've already done a full episode on this, so head back and find that if you want. But what I do want to share here is the origin story, because this is a good one. Legend has it that during the Gallic Wars of 52 BC, the Gallic king sent Julius Caesar a rooster as a symbol of Gallic pride and defiance. Caesar, not one to miss an opportunity, invited him to dinner and served the rooster back to him, simmered in wine. The Gallic king then went on to inflict one of the most humiliating military defeats on Caesar that the Roman legions had ever seen. So whether the story is true or not, the French have essentially been making this dish as a victory meal for 2,000 years. I love that. What's also fascinating is the coq au vin isn't really just one dish. It's a whole family of dishes that changes depending on where you are in France. In Burgundy, it's made with Jambon, one of the great Pinot Noirs of the region. In Alsace, it becomes coq au Riesling, completely different in character, lighter, creamier. And in the Jura, they use yellow wine and morels. Same idea, but entirely different personality. It's a lovely reminder that French cuisine is really a collection of regional cuisines rather than one single thing. And Burgundy just happens to have one of the most celebrated versions. Now, the one that divides the room, escargot, or more specifically, escargot à la Bourgogne. Before we get to the dish, though, let's talk about the ingredient itself, because, well, the Burgundy snail, Helexa plumatia, is a whole story in its own. These are wild snails, and in France they are so prized and so at risk that they've been a protected species since 1979. You can't collect them in spring during breeding season, and there are strict rules around size and timing for the rest of the year. The demand is so high and the wild population so stretched that most of what you'll find in restaurants today actually comes from farms or is imported from Poland and Eastern Europe, which is something the French feel very complicated about. As you can imagine, France consumes around 30,000 tons of snails a year. So let that number stick with you for a moment. And then there's the dish itself. Burgundy snails baked in their own shells with garlic, parsley, and butter. Snail butter, as the French call it, until the butter is melting and bubbling and the whole thing smells, well, extraordinary. The recipe as we know it today was essentially put on the map in 1814, when the legendary chef Marie-Antoine Carême, known as the King of Chefs and the Chef of Kings, prepared them for a diplomatic dinner hosted by Talleyrand in honor of Tsar Alexander I of Russia. A Burgundian recipe served at one of the most important diplomatic tables in Europe. It worked, both gastronomically and diplomatically, apparently, and they've been an embedded part of French cuisine ever since. If you've always been on the fence about trying them, Burgundy is absolutely the place to do it. Next is one of my absolute favourites, and honestly, one of the most underrated dishes in French cuisine. Oeufs en Meurette. Eggs poached in red wine, served with a sauce of red wine, lardons, onions, and shallots, usually on top of toasted garlic bread. I know what you're thinking. Poaching eggs in red wine sounds, well, completely bizarre. But trust me on this one. The eggs take on this deep, almost mahogany colour from the wine, and the yolk is still runny, and the sauce is rich and silky, and just a little bit indulgent for what is essentially an egg dish. It's one of those things that sounds odd until you taste it, and then you're completely hooked. What I find fascinating is that the sauce, the Meurette, is essentially a close cousin of the Bœuf Bourguignon sauce that we just talked about. Same foundations, same spirit, just applied to something far more humble. And in some kitchens, particularly at home, it's actually made using the leftover sauce from the Bœuf Bourguignon, which makes complete sense. Nothing goes to waste, and everything tastes better for it. I actually experienced this firsthand at a wonderful chateau restaurant in Burgundy, Oeufs or Meurette, as the entree, followed by the Bœuf Bourguignon as the main. The same sauce threading through the entire meal. It was one of those evenings that you just don't forget. There are a couple of ways to make it. You can poach the eggs separately in vinegared water and then pour the Meurette sauce over the top, which keeps the egg white bright. Or you can poach the eggs directly in the sauce itself, which is my preferred version. The egg becomes completely infused with the wine, and the flavour goes all the way through. Either way, if you see it on a menu in Burgundy, order it. You can thank me later. Now, if there's one thing that signals the start of a meal in Burgundy, it's a plate of gougères landing on the table. These are light, hollow choux pastry puffs made with cheese, traditionally Gruyere or Comté, baked until they're golden and crisp on the outside and almost cloud-like within. They're the classic Burgundian aperitif snack. Once you've had a warm one straight from the oven, you will completely understand why they've stuck around for centuries. They are dangerously easy to eat. The origins, they're a little hazy. There's mentions of something called a goire, meaning cheese pie, as far back as the 14th century, and the town of Flongin-la-Chapelle in Burgundy claims to be the true birthplace, celebrating with an actual gougère festival every May, complete with a brotherhood of gougère tasters, which is generally a real organisation that exists today. What I love about gougères, though, is how deceptively simple they are. Butter, water, flour, eggs, and cheese. That's it. And yeah, the technique matters enormously. There's even a rule that you must not open the oven door during cooking or they'll collapse flat, which feels very French somehow. Beautiful, a little temperamental, and absolutely worth the effort. Here's one that I'd wager most people outside of France have never heard of, which is a shame because it's absolutely wonderful. Jambon persil, parsleyed ham. It's a terrine of ham slowly simmered in white Burgundian wine with mustard, white vinegar, garlic, onion, and carrots. Then roughly pulled apart into chunks and set in a beautifully marbled parsley jelly made from the cooking broth itself. You slice it cold, serve it with a salad and a cornichon or two, and you have one of those things that looks almost too pretty to eat. Almost. It's been a Burgundian tradition since the 14th century, originally made at home for Easter. The kind of dish that would take days to prepare and would sit at the centre of the family table as something of a celebration piece. The wine and the vinegar in the broth do double duty here, flavouring the meat deeply while also acting as a natural preservative, which means a well-made jambon persil could keep for several weeks. These days, production is largely industrial. In fact, one company alone produces half of all the jambon persil made in France. But find a good charcutier or a proper Burgundian bistro, and the homemade version is something entirely different. It's the kind of dish that reminds you that the best French food isn't always the most glamorous. Sometimes it's just a really excellent terrine and a glass of wine on a Sunday afternoon. I've saved the best origin story for last. Poulet Gaston Gerard. Chicken braised in white wine and finished with Dijon mustard, creme fraiche, grated comté and paprika until it becomes this gorgeous golden, slightly indulgent thing that you want to eat immediately and then probably again the next day. It's a classic of Dijon cuisine and it's absolutely delicious. But the reason everyone remembers it isn't really the recipe, it's how it came to exist. In August 1930, a woman named Geneviève Bourgogne was cooking at home in Dijon for a rather important guest. That guest was Gonowski, the self-styled Prince of Gourmet, and arguably the most influential food critic in France at the time. No pressure then. Mid-cook, she accidentally knocked an entire jar of paprika into the casserole. And rather than panic, she did what any resourceful cook would do. She kept going, adding white wine, creme fraiche, and grated comté to pull the whole thing back together. Kononsky tasted it, loved it, and named the dish after her husband, Gaston Gerard, the deputy mayor of Dijon. A happy accident that became a permanent fixture of Burgundy and cuisine. The recipe calls for breast chicken, ideally, which, if you caught the Coltide episode, you know is no ordinary bird. And the result is the kind of dish that makes you think some of the best things in cooking happen when something goes gloriously wrong. Whilst on the subject of breast chicken, if you've never heard of it, here's the thing you need to know. This is the most strictly regulated, most protected chicken in the world. It's the only poultry anywhere on the planet with an AOC designation, France's highest form of protected status, which has been held since 1957. The production area is tiny, a strip of land about 100 kilometres by 40 kilometres, straddling the departments of Ain, Saône-et-Loire and the Jura. You cannot call it breast chicken if it comes from anywhere else. And the rules around how these birds are raised are extraordinary. Every single chicken must have a minimum of 10 square meters of outdoor space. They are fed on non-GMO corn and milk. They spend at least 9 weeks roaming freely before a short finishing period. A capon must be at least 9 months old before slaughter. These are, without question, the most well-traveled, best-fed chickens in existence. The result is a bird that is generally unlike anything you'll find in a supermarket. The meat is firm, deeply flavored, and has a richness that comes directly from how the animal lived. The gastronome, Julius Caesar, described the breast hen back in 1825 as the queen of poultry and the poultry of kings. And honestly, nearly 200 years later, nobody has really argued with that. Let's get into the ingredients that make the Burgundian cuisine what it is, starting with one that you've probably seen grazing in the fields if you've ever driven through this part of France. Charolais cattle. These beautiful, pale, almost creamy white animals are everywhere in southern Burgundy, and they are the reason the beef here is so extraordinary. The breed originates from the area around the town of Charelles in the Saône-et-Loire, and they are serious animals. Bulls can weigh up to 1,600 kilograms, which is an almost incomprehensible amount of beef. They are the most common beef breed in France and have spread to 68 countries around the world, with large populations as far afield as Mexico and the Czech Republic, which tells you everything you need to know about how good the beef is. What makes them so special for cooking, and specifically for something like a Bœuf Bourguignon, is the quality of the meat itself. It's well muscled, with good marbling, and the tougher cuts that traditionally go into a slow braise absolutely come alive over a long, low cook in red wine. There's a reason Charolais beef and Burgundy wine are so often spoken about in the same breath. They are generally made for each other. Two products of the same landscape, essentially. The Charolais-Brionnais region actually applied to UNESCO for World Heritage status back in 2011, citing the cultural landscape of raising these cattle. It was unsuccessful, which feels like a missed opportunity, frankly, because if anywhere deserves that kind of recognition for what it produces, it's here, Burgundy. Here's one that generally surprises people. When most of us think truffles, we think of Périgord in the southwest of France, or perhaps Italy. But Burgundy has its own serious truffle culture that most visitors never hear about, and it deserves far more attention than it gets. The Burgundian truffle thrives in the region's limestone soils, living in symbiosis with oaks, hazelnuts, and beech trees. And it's harvested between September and January by truffle dogs working through the forests. Around 10 tons are harvested in Burgundy every year, which is a significant amount of one of the most prized ingredients in the world. And here's the historical footnote that I love. Until the Renaissance, the Burgundian truffle was the only truffle that appeared on the table of the kings of France. It was only when Francois I developed a taste for Périgord varieties that Burgundian truffle was nudged out of the spotlight, a culinary power shift, if you like. The Burgundian truffle is a little different in character to the more famous Périgord cousin. The flesh is dark brown with white veins running through it, and the flavour is earthier and nuttier, often described as close to hazelnut, with a more delicate perfume than the intense heady hit of black Périgord. Some people actually prefer it for that reason. It's a little more subtle, a little more versatile. Production collapsed in the early 20th century, but has been steadily revived over the last few decades, thanks to new truffle cultivation methods, which is good news, well, for everybody. If you're visiting Burgundy between autumn and January, keep an eye out for it on the menus. It tends to appear quietly, without any fuss, which feels very Burgundian somehow. If there is one ingredient that is completely synonymous with Burgundy, beyond wine, it's mustard. Dijon mustard specifically, and the history of it here goes back much further than most people realize. Mustard has been part of this landscape since the Romans, who co-planted mustard seeds alongside the first vineyards in the region, which tells you something about how deeply embedded it is into the DNA of Burgundian food and farming. The Dijon mustard we recognize today, that sharp, clean, intensely flavored condiment, only really came together in the late 19th century, when a local man named Jean Najon made one crucial change to the traditional recipe. He replaced vinegar with verjus, the pressed juice of unripened grapes from the Burgundian vineyards. That swap transformed the flavor entirely, giving it a sharper, more complex acidity that became the defining characteristics of Dijon mustard as we know it today. One ingredient swap, that's all it took. There are a couple of things worthy of note about Dijon mustard today that you might surprise you. First, despite being one of the most iconic French condiments in the world, the name Dijon mustard is actually not a protected designation of origin. It refers to a method of production rather than a specific place, which means it can technically be made anywhere in the world. And indeed, around 80% of the mustard seeds used in the production today come from Canada rather than Burgundy. Second, and this is my favorite fact in this entire section, the American rapper and DJ who goes by the name of Mustard chose that name because his first name is Dijon. So somewhere out there, Burgundy's most famous condiment has a hip-hop legacy, and I feel that Escoffier would have loved that. If you love discovering the very best places to eat, wander, and indulge in Paris, well, I have something rather delicious for you. My book, Paris, A Fabulous Food Guide to the World's Most Delicious City, has just been newly updated, and it's bigger and better than ever. The new edition offers over 100 additional pages exploring the history of food in Paris, so you can understand not just where to eat, but why Paris became the gastronomic capital of the world in the first place. Alongside my favorite boulangeries, patisseries, fromageries, wine bars, markets, restaurants, and hidden gems, you'll now also find dedicated sections for vegan and vegetarian dining in Paris, beautiful food with a view spots for those unforgettable meals, and even a special highlight of locations featured in Emily in Paris. So you can dine where they dined and sit where Emily sipped. It's the guide I wish I'd had when I first started exploring Paris, full of personal recommendations, trusted addresses, and the kind of places that make you close your eyes after the first bite. You can order your copy directly from my website, andrewpryorfabulously.com. It's also available on Amazon, and if you prefer to shop locally, simply ask your favorite independent bookstore to order it in for you. Supporting local bookshops is always a fabulous idea. So, if a trip to Paris is on your horizon, or you simply want to dream about one from your kitchen table, Paris, A Fabulous Food Guide to the World's Most Delicious City, is your delicious companion.